tell me, what is the Osprey plant? What does it do? And why is this important?
So the Osprey plant is one of the plants in the city of Titusville that takes your sewage. So when you flush your toilet, your sewage goes down and through a series of pipes and it goes to this plant. And what they do at this plant, which is located somewhat near Sandpoint Park, it's right off of the Indian River Lagoon. You can't see it from US 1, but it's in that general area. And what this plant does is it takes your sewage and it treats it. And so it sits in these tanks, and it's really interesting. I've toured tons of sewage facilities to see what they do with it, and nobody ever thinks about where things go once they flush that toilet.
And rightly so. Still, never given it a thought.
Right. So that's what the Osprey plant is. Not many people know about it, but it's there, and it's had issues for many, many years. They haven't kept up with maintenance with it. And so recently, there's been issues with the plant and breaks and things like that. And then, there was some Florida Department of Environmental Protection notices that came out about 15,000 gallons that spilled, and then they put out a couple more on reclaimed water. And so
now tell us, reclaimed, the difference between sewage and reclaimed is what?
So raw sewage is just straight sewage, and then reclaimed is when they have actually treated it. But it doesn't take out things like PFAS chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and so it's better than your raw sewage, but it's not the best, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And so there's been these issues happening at that plant, and so yes, they had some pollution notices come out, and one of the biggest issues I think that needs to be on Titusville residents' radar, and these conversations need to be happening with your council members, is the long-term plans, because
there doesn't seem to be any in Titusville.
We're just putting Band-Aids on a gaping wound here, and what they really need to do is start considering building a brand new sewage plant, or if we just...
But isn't that why Titusville water rates are higher than most other cities in this county?
I think there's multiple...
I mean, they were supposed to be using that money for that. Some of it was to pay the EPA fines, right?
Yes, but also there's an issue in Titusville where their wells were drying up and they had salt intrusion, and so they had this Miami Corp, and so they're buying their water. So your rates are higher, and you really need to look into that situation for their drinking water, because they're buying water from Cocoa. They've had to put in these wells, and they have to work with Miami Corp, and they have a whole separate board for that to talk about that. The wells on Garden Street stopped working. There's issues even in MEMS right now. If you talk to people throughout MEMS, where their wells are drying up and they're having to put in new wells. And so we're having an issue of depletion of aquifer, meaning we're running out of water. That's why there's discussions currently about turning our sewage into drinking water. And I don't think people
We've talked about that.
Yes.
Sewer to tap.
Yes.
And they've actually are doing that in California, I think.
Yes, and they are seriously considering it here. We've gone on tours where they've talked about this is a serious conversation. And in Florida, do you think that we'll ever run out of water? We're surrounded by water.
Well, why would you build desalination plants rather than this? I mean, wouldn't that be better? Okay, I'm sorry. They say that the technology is there, but I want the high officials to be the first ones to drink from it. I want to see them drink from it. And when you drink from it, then I'll consider it.
Right. Well,
I'm not for it.
Well, I just know, I mean, another thing that they can consider is talking to, because Space Florida is seriously considering, it's not a done deal. It's not even, this is very premature. They're in study phase. But they're considering putting a new sewage plant, in between Port St. John and Titusville area, and that could be another possibility where they can, possibly tap into that in the future. But I think that this needs to be a serious conversation.
Now, Megan Moscoso brought this up at the Titusville City Council meeting this past week. The City Council seemed to have been caught off guard by it, that they didn't know some of the problems that were going on at this plant. And Scott Larice, presumably, the bureaucrats, they knew what was going on. And so is there a question as to, is this a reason why they were fighting the Clean Water Initiative so hardly?
Oh, I think it's one of many reasons. I think that this is one reason. I think they've known that they've had issues at that plant. They've known they've had issues with the infrastructure, and they're one of the polluters that would be held accountable under the right to clean water, because they've continuously allowed these spills to happen and they didn't maintain it. And it goes back to a question of, where have you been investing all of your money throughout the last few decades, not just the
Particularly
last
with
10
all
years.
of the tax increases.
Correct.
Well, we know
yes.
about 240,000 went to Larice, but where did the rest of it go?
Right, and that's what there's another call for an internal audit. For that reason, there's been discussions about money and what's going on with, what's happened with
Do you
all
think that there's going to realistically be an internal audit? And who would call for that and how would that happen?
I think a council member needs to call for it, and I think the rest of them need to be on board with it.
And anybody that doesn't, then you have to question
Yep.
why they would vote against this.
Right, because it would be full transparency, and it would also help build trust back with the government, the local government, between the people. You've had these questions out there for at least 10 years, if not more. I mean, people have been questioning the money, the fines, like you just brought up. You're like, well, we've been getting fines. We have to pay for that somehow. Your tax money pays for those fines.
And the question that continually comes up is why is the city of Titusville, why are they paying water rates that are far above most cities in Brevard County? I mean, and there's a lot of citizens, they don't understand that.
Right.
Why is that? And so you've explained some of the issues. The other thing is the appellate court denied the rehearing on the Clean Water Initiative. And so that happened Thursday?
Yeah, it happened this past week, and they got the word that they are not going to rehear it at the appellate court.
So is this a situation where you've got the system that is stacked against them?
I believe so. I do. And I mean, you've got this is the consequences of getting preemptions done on the state level that doesn't allow local government to make decisions for themselves and citizens to be able to do these things.
But it goes back to if Titusville, once the measure was passed, if they would have just processed it and went through as they had a right to do, because that was their responsibility. It wasn't their responsibility to question this. It was their responsibility to enact it. Then you wouldn't be in this situation, right?
No, yeah, you're right. And I think the biggest issue here that we've continuously and consistently talked about was the process. It's not necessarily the actual amendment itself, right? Like, there could be issues with the right to clean water. I don't think anybody's denied that or hasn't questioned that. But where we have an issue is the process itself. Where was the city council during this process? Why did the citizens feel that they even had to do a ballot initiative? Why couldn't the citizens feel that they could go directly to their council members and communicate with them and create a plan that would help address the issues that they were seeing unfolding in front of their eyes with the sewage spills and the fish kills and things like that?
But the city, it's kind of like a football game. They knew all they had to do was run out the clock. And they knew going down the line that they had these courts that were going to rule in their favor, ultimately. And that they had the money, the taxpayers' money, that they were spending. It was no sweat off their back. So all they had to do is use the taxpayer money to run the clock out.
Yeah, that's what they do. I mean, if you see citizens try to take on the government, it's very difficult because they do have taxpayer money, and they will just continue to endlessly use it. They will draw out a case for 10 years if they have to.
And that's why we call the four on the city council the Judas Four. They have betrayed the people. And this kind of betrayal is unbelievable. It's of the worst kind, because your first responsibility is to the people of this county, not to the special interests, not to the developers. It's to the people, and you have betrayed them. And this is a classic example of it, and it's really sad. And so that's what we have going on water-wise in Brevard County.